Today I'm setting up some of the first elements of my InDesign newsletter. So this is just a basic document. I've already chosen to open up a new document. I've given it a name. Right now it says basic. I may change it to basic newsletter. And what I want to do is just use the rulers to set up some guides and use my text tool to set up areas where I'm going to put headlines and body text. So to get started, I'm going to pull down some guides. If I want to pull down a guide that's only going to be in the actual live area of my page, I'll pull down from within the page, and my guide doesn't extend over the edges of the page. If I want my guide to take up the entire pasteboard, meaning the gray area and the page itself, I'll pull down from the ruler outside of that. I'm just dropping everything in at the 2-inch mark. Incidentally, if my precision isn't great, as long as my guide is highlighted, I can change the placement of it here if I decide, I don't know, to put it at, maybe I think 2 inches is too much. Perhaps I want to put it at 1 3/4 inches. I can always just type that, and as long as the guide is selected and lock guides is not on from view menu, which would be here, my guides are not locked. As long as the guides aren't locked, I can select it and move it around, either drag it around, or I can select it and change the coordinates for the Y placement in here. So I'm going to drop down another guide. Actually, I'm going to leave that selected. I want to put it in at 2 inches, so I'm going to leave it at the 2-inch mark and just hit return once I do that. So it moves back to the 2-inch mark. So now I'm going to pull down another guide, just give myself an artificial kind of gutter. Normally, if I want to have column spacing, I usually follow top to bottom the same spacing that I choose for the gutters on margins. I don't have any margins yet on this document. That's okay. If I know when I'm starting a document how many columns I'm going to have in it, I might have margin guides for those columns and everything all set up from the beginning, but sometimes I put them in later depending on what I find out from my clients. So I've got 2 guides in here. They're spaced a 1/4 inch apart. One is at 2 inches, the other one is at 2 1/4. Hey, that's not 2 1/4, that says 2.22. So let's change that. Okay, put the 5 in there, 2.25, hit return. Much more precise than relying on me to do that. So I'm going to put in my first text box now with the type tool. Type tool, I usually use the margins as a guide. If I'm away from the margin, you can see that the cursor and insertion point has a little black arrow in it. As I move closer to the margin guide, it turns into this little outline arrow that's in there. So I'm going to click and drag down and fill up from margin to margin guide. My margins are set because I didn't change any of the defaults on the document. They're set at 1/2 inch. So that's what I'm working with. So now you can't really see it, you can't see the bounding box, but you do see the blinking cursor up here. This is going to be my text box, and it's where I'm going to type my first headline. I'm not sure what font I'm going to use. The default font that InDesign gives me is Minion Pro. That's not something I would normally use for any kind of document that anybody asks me to do. I will probably change this to something that is more readable. Actually, let's make it all lowercase, and I'll show you a little trick. Okay, so now I've got this thing, it's a headline, but I'm going to have a tagline too. So I'll put that in first, and then we'll start changing things. Okay, so I've got a headline. What's going to become my headline? Yeah. I know it's like, oh, it's dinky. It's only 12 point. It said change it to something other than Minion Pro. It's still Minion Pro. So I'm going to change this to something that looks more like a headline. Something big, something bold. It doesn't necessarily have to be fancy. I can get away with something more decorative if it's just the headline or if it's part of the branding. And if I click on a little arrow here, I can search for text that way. I can also search in my, it's not selected anymore, so okay, let's select. So we can also search in the type menu, do the same thing, go to font. It'll show you all little samples over on the right hand side and the name of the font on that side. Or, not to make this confusing, if you go to window menu, go down to type and tables and choose character, or hit, if you're on a Mac it'll be Command T, if you're on a PC it's going to be Control T. That'll bring up this little panel where you can basically do the same things that I just did by going up here to the path bar or over here to the type menu. You can do the same thing over here and search for whatever font you think you want to use. I'm just going to choose Arial Black because it's big and it's bold. And I'm going to make this a lot bigger. 12 point, yeah, doesn't cut it. I have choices in here that go up to 72 point. These are just generic suggested sizes. Usually they really don't do what I need them to do. I can use the up arrow to make something bigger. I really just want to fill the space from margin to margin because it's a headline and it's got to look aesthetically nice. Okay, so that's going to take up a lot of space, which is good. I can also, from the character panel, I can hunt for other things that aren't there. If I wanted to, I don't know, change the width of the letters, if I decided, hey, I want to up the point size, but I want to make this fit, I can reduce the width of the letters. One, you know, I don't have what, it's like using paint right out of the tube. Is that a good comparison? I don't have to use the type straight away as it appears. I can always change it if I think I can fill the space better. What I don't want to do is have anything that extends over my margin areas, because in theory if I'm printing or sending this to a printer, that's the stuff that might get chopped off. So I always want to allow, unless I'm asked to put a different size margin in there, it's usually ½ inch margin or 0.5 as it will appear. So now it's time to turn my tagline into something else. If I'm working with one font in something, like I said, headline can be something a little bit more decorative, but the body text and taglines, for a tagline, I might have something I might be asked to put it in italics. It's important in any document that I produce that I do not break basic typography rules, like no more than 3 different fonts. I usually limit myself to 2. Minion Pro is the default. I don't want that, so I'm going to choose Arial regular for this. And for font size, I'm going to bump that up slightly because it is a tagline. It can be larger than the rest of whatever I've got on the page. I'm going to use my paragraph tools, and again, close character panel for now. Things that will help me align this. Up here in the path bar, I've got some of the same things that I've got in the paragraph panel. So align left, which is what things are now. Align center, which is what I'm going to do. Align right, which, unless I'm asked to do that, we're not doing that today. We're going to choose align center. And I know, I just mentioned paragraph panel. What is the paragraph panel? If I do the same thing where I go to window menu and I scroll to type and tables and choose paragraph, paragraph will bring up this panel. I can do the same things, center, that I can do up here. I can also do some other things. Let's close that for now. I can add shading, I can add borders, I can specify, and this is for body text, not for headlines, but I can specify space, indents, space before paragraph, space after paragraph. We're going to do that as we start putting in body text. So I'm going to close that for now. Actually, character panel. Go back to character panel. So I'm going to do the keyboard shortcut for that. Command T. Okay. And I'm going to choose all caps for my headline, which kind of bumped things off the page. Great. So I'm going to reduce the width of that slightly. If I can't see the whole thing, I can always just temporarily, hey, what happened? Okay, so bumped it down to a new line. What did I do for the width of that one? 78. Set that one to okay. So now the tagline below it needs to be lined up. Moving the text box back. Needs to be lined up with that guide. I don't want it floating there. I want it so that the leading between these two lines forces this tagline to kind of drop down so that it's sitting on where we put the guide at that 2-inch mark. So if I select everything, my leading is over here in my character panel. Also, leading is up here as well. It's set by default to auto. Leading means the space between each line. If you hover over the little icon for, let's say, 2 letters, like one line above another and a little arrow, if you hover over any of these, it'll tell you exactly what they are. Leading, tracking, kerning. So I want to change this. If I just hit the down arrow, it's not going to do anything. So if I change this to something else, might totally crash. Okay, so 24 point. Once I change it, I can keep moving it so that it looks like at 28 point, leading, that is just about sitting on that guideline. Okay, I'm not going to mess with it. I'm going to leave it the way it is. Next, I'm going to start laying in body text with a new text box.